the wide receiver position. I've talked to a lot of different people this week, Corey, John Macaroon, and kind of getting their thoughts on what's happening in this wide receiver room, from all the way from like Tim Patrick and Tesla to the back end with like Jackson Meeks and Dominic Lovett. How do you kind of see this thing playing out? And then especially today, you get to see a lot of those guys get a lot more reps, it felt like, out there. And then obviously Saturday, you'll get to see a lot more of those guys. What are your thoughts on how this thing will play out?
Yeah, it's kind of like what you said. I think Khalif Raymond is getting a surprising workload. Like you look at his last 2 years, 27% offensive snaps, 30% offensive snaps. It's definitely like a way higher rate of him being on the field in these practices so far. And whenever they have had a third wide receiver on the field, it has been Khalif Raymond instead of Isaac Tesla or even Tim Patrick, like you mentioned. So I've been a little bit surprised by that, just because like Khalif's place in the offense has been so defined as like the wide receiver 4 gadget guy. Like going into last year, you knew he was quote unquote, you knew he was the third guy on the depth chart, but like they were very open about needing a wide receiver 3. And I don't really know that a whole lot has changed to Khalif Raymond's game in the last year. So that tells me like they like made a conscious effort to maybe incorporate him more in the game plan and use his skill set, because he is a valuable piece. He has a distinct skill set. But that being said, I still am a little bit surprised that we haven't seen more of Tesla out there, because he's been doing so well. And, you know, he's been going against the 2s. He's been dominating against the 2s, but that to me means it's time to move him off to the 1s. And he just provides something unique. So I've been surprised that they haven't rotated him in there even just a little bit more. Like even if it was just, you know, they come out, they do a team period where they have 4 or 5 offensive snaps with the first team, like get him out there for 1 or 2. And, you know, maybe they're just trying to make sure that the reserve quarterbacks have some decent wide receivers to throw to. But at the end of the day, you're getting ready for the season. You're getting ready to try to win a Super Bowl. I'd like to see Tesla out there a little bit more.
Yeah, I do think that was weird. Like, at least the practices I've been to, I don't think I've seen Tesla at all with the 1s. Not once.
It's been like that all camp. Yeah.
That feels weird. That feels like they should be getting him kind of ramped up to be at least have action with Jared Goff. But there are like obviously the conversations that he still throws or catches with Jared Goff, just not in those kind of situations. What did you take away too? And I had put it out there. I guess Easy did too. Me and Easy were up there and we were trying to race to put it out. But obviously the Graham Glasgow stuff feels like it's a bigger situation. Obviously we don't know how major or minor the injury is, the leg injury. But obviously him being like your center, especially losing Frank this last offseason, what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think that if he's out week 1, do they just slide Tate over and then who fills in that guard? How does that work out if there is something going on?
Yeah, I didn't see the injury like I saw when it happened. I saw him on the ground after the play, but I didn't actually see what happened to him. And then I was kind of keeping an eye on him. Looked like maybe he was heading off with a pair of trainers, which is probably not the best sign. But again, you know, these things do happen. Like guys will get carted off and then it'll be like, oh, they're fine. You know, just training camp, it seems like they're a little bit more cautious with those things. But yeah, if he can't go in week 1, like that is a major, major concern to me, because Tate hasn't gotten center snaps since the 3rd day of training camp, and they kind of made a conscious decision to move on from that pretty quickly. And I know we got all that time in the spring, and maybe that does help him. Maybe that does allow the Lions to move him over to center in a real game. But I think for the most part, like the whole idea of putting him at center was working in tandem with this idea that Graham Glasgow would be next to him and be able to help him through some of the mental side of things, the checks and things like that he has to do. And if Graham Glasgow is not there, I don't really know that Tate is going to be prepared to do that. And, you know, so I think that is a big deal. And that leads me to believe that in a pinch, they would probably pull somebody up from the reserves, whether it be Kingsley Agwakun, whether it be Michael Neese, whether it be Tristan Colon, who's not exactly healthy right now, but who knows, as we get closer to week 1, maybe that status changes a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it's a big problem that I don't necessarily know they have a digestible solution for. You know, you can put Kingsley back there, or, you know, you can put Michael Neese back there, but those guys, you know, they're on the roster bubble in some ways. And Kingsley, I've had him making the 53-man roster just because of the fact that they don't really have anybody else to play center. They don't have a Graham Glasgow at guard who can slide right over and has ample experience doing so like they have in years past. It's Tate Rowledge, who's never played any center. It's Christian Mahogany, who's never played any center. And then behind them, your options are a bunch of guys who have never taken a meaningful NFL snap. So it's definitely a concern if he's not able to go week one or even worse, has to miss more time during the season.
Yeah, I feel like today was a little bit of an eye opener of the depth at that position, where it was like, wait, if Graham does go down, who's up next? And that was actually something when camp started that I had brought up with Tate. Was I had always been, I started off on the side of, hey, I would rather have Tate go center, because if he gets those reps all camp, then like he's ready to go like instantly, because at some point he's probably gonna have to play center, whether it's injury or next year. Mm-hmm. And then obviously Graham, the thing that turned me was Jared Goff and them basically being like, hey, we would rather have Graham just as being a vet and having to do that job instead of a guard and essentially center at the same time.
Yeah, and Graham said that too. He said he likes playing center. He enjoys the mental challenge of it. And then he said if that's what their plan is to put me at guard and then have me do all the center stuff, I'd rather just play center. So I thought that it was pretty settled and things were going well. There were definitely days where DJ Reader and Tyreek Williams were getting the best of them, but I think that's more of a compliment to those guys than it is a knock against maybe the interior players on Detroit's O-line.
Yeah, definitely. And I do want to, before we switch to defense, I want to bring up John Morton, because you've been at practice all training camp, so you've been able to kind of see the progression. One thing I felt that since the first camp practice that I saw to today, you could definitely tell the offense is getting more confident in that play calling and everything's getting kind of a lot better. What is your takeaway so far, the John Morton thing? I know a lot of fans are questioning it. I actually heard a lot of fans today at camp that were talking to us and coming up to us, and then they would be bring up John Morton and be like, the play calling actually looks really good today. And I was like, I think this is starting to come together and the worries don't need to be there as much. Do you get that same feeling, or how do you feel about the John Morton training?
Yeah. And I've pretty much been there since the start of camp, the when you look at that 2022 room and the guys who had an impact on that offense when the Lions offense first started picking up, it was Ben Johnson, obviously first and foremost. It was Dan Campbell, Jared Goff, and John Morton. Those are kind of the four guys who I think I've seen credited with putting that whole thing together. And 3 of the 4 of those guys are still here. So, I was never overly concerned. And one thing I have always been impressed about with Campbell is he is a heavy scrutinizer. He is willing to do what needs to be done. He's ruthless in that way. Anthony Lynn, I just brought this up on an appearance I did a couple days ago, but Anthony Lynn, 10 games into his first year as offensive coordinator, Dan Campbell's like, this isn't working. We got to pull the plug. All of a sudden, everything turns around. And since they fired Anthony Lynn, they have had a legitimately good to elite offense pretty much the entire time. So I think very highly of Dan Campbell when it comes to making those decisions and making the right decisions for his football team. And then in terms of what we've actually seen out on the field this training camp, don't get me wrong, they've struggled a lot of days. And, there were times where it's hard to contextualize because they're going up against the same defense every single day. And you're like, well, this defense kind of keeps getting the better of them, but this defense is also really, really good. And the only real piece that they're missing out there right now from their starters, they missed some time with Terran Arnold and Kirby Joseph. Both those guys missed a little bit of time. But then Ali McNeil, he's really the only piece that's been missing for the entirety of camp. And so he's obviously a really important player, but what that tells me is that this unit is good as an entity. And there were also times where the defense was winning because Taylor Decker was not there, and then all of a sudden Jamarco Jones and Dan Skipper got hurt, and then all of a sudden it's Giovanni Manu playing against Aidan Hutchinson and Marcus Davenport, and it's well, that doesn't work. And they were getting blown up for obvious reasons. And so I think the joint practices against Miami and then what we saw today, I think really painted a clear picture of maybe where this offense is at as opposed to what we've seen from them play against the Lions defense, because last week they faced a defense that was really bad and they absolutely killed them, play after play after play after play. Today they faced a defense that was really good and they won some, they lost some. They threw some heavy blows. I mean, you saw it there today. 7-on-7 period, they killed them, which I don't really put all that much stock into 7-on-7, but I think for the most part, they struggled to run the ball, but Goff was still hitting a lot of passes. There were a lot of drops today, which I thought was kind of out of
crazy.
character for those guys. Tim Patrick, JMO, Khalif even dropped a pass in the situational drill at the end of practice. But I think on the whole, you have all these great players and you have a scheme that looks pretty similar to what we've seen from this team the last couple of years. So I think they're going to be fine ultimately.
Do you think too? Because I had the thought today with Jared Goff. Because today it felt like Jared Goff was really good, and it felt like he did have a lot of time in the pocket a lot. There was a practice a couple weeks ago where the Lions' offense just got destroyed, and then everyone started coming out and saying, Jared can't play outside of a Ben Johnson offense without Frank and this. I feel like since then, Jared's just like complete uphill, and he has looked really good. And like today, like you said, there were the drops. If there weren't those drops, it felt like he would have had there was a couple maybe plays here and there he couldn't get the ball if there was the strip sack. Do you still I know just like with the offense, but with Jared, do you get that same sense that, hey, he's still playing at an extremely high level and he just keeps getting better every week?
Yeah, he's been fantastic. Like point blank, no question about it. When he has the time to make the throw, he makes the throw. He puts it on a dime. There was that Amon-Ra St. Brown highlight clip against the Dolphins that was going viral last week, and I tweeted out, and like half the replies were like, "This is just as much of a Jared Goff highlight tape as it is an Amon-Ra St. Brown highlight tape," because he was really that good. And from what we've seen all camp, he's been money. He's struggled a little bit connecting with maybe some down the field stuff that he seemed to have figured out. But I think that was a result of not trusting the protection to his blind side and knowing that Aidan Hutchinson was going against Giovanni Manu when he couldn't see them. And I do think that disrupted the timing, because that is one way to get to Jared Goff, is to disrupt the timing and of that entire operation, and all of a sudden things start getting a little wonky every now and then. But for the most part, man, when he lets the ball go, it's going exactly where he wants it to, and most of the time his receivers are making the play.
Yeah, there was a couple throws today where I was like, there's no way he's about to get this off. And then he gets it off, and it's in like the tightest pocket, and it's a completion, and you're like, how did this guy just make that throw?
Yeah, like the one he threw the pass to JMO, it was like a skinny corner route. He put it right in the next to the back pylon of the end zone, right between the safety and the corner, and JMO couldn't get his feet down. But it was just like bam, like vintage. That is what I come to know as like vintage Goff now. I think when I think of Goff, I think of like down the field, plant your leg and drive it throws. And obviously that's a little bit of a different one. You're getting air under it and stuff like that. But he's still beating both defenders to the spot.
He's got an arm. I don't think he gets enough credit sometimes.
People
talk about the, what do they call it? Easy, and them always call it the duck. And I responded. So the duck threw for 4,500 yards. It flew for 4,500 yards. That thing's beautiful. All right. Defensively, I do want to ask, I know you weren't watching the defense. I'm sure you have an idea of what happened today. I did see the reports, 4 interceptions in the defense. It was kind of more so, it felt like an evenly matched joint practice than it was versus the Dolphins. Did you have some takeaways from defensively with your team there that saw, that matchup?
I gotta be honest, yes, but I didn't necessarily read them. From what I understand, it was a pretty even day. I was talking to my coworker Richard Silva, and we were walking off. I was like, "You feel like anybody won today?" Because I didn't feel like anybody won on the Lions' offensive side of the ball. Like I said, I feel like they were trading punches for most of it. Lions scored plenty of touchdowns. Texans had plenty of pass breakups and whatever. But on the defensive side of the ball, when I asked him that, he was like, maybe the Texans won like 55-45. And I was like,
okay, wow.
Okay. That's pretty even. He said if it wasn't a dead push, it was about 55-45. So, I got to be honest. I didn't necessarily read the entire part of that. I got to do that a little bit later tonight. But I mean, their defense has been playing phenomenal. And when you get these teams in there and you can kind of stack up against different competition, and the Texans are a great team. Like, I think that's one thing that, like, I don't know if people fully recognize and appreciate. They probably do, because CJ Stroud has been excellent for 2 years, but and the Lions played them in a crazy game last year. But this Texans team is really good. Like, they have the same aspirations that the Lions do going into this year. So
I've interrupted the video to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Comer & Cross, and their one-day installation for concrete floor coatings, garages, basements, patios. They do it all. And I'm sure you're tired of staring at your crack-stained garage floor. Well, I have the answer for you. Comer & Cross, in their summer installation sale, they're offering 12 months same as cash or $500 in savings. Why put it off? You can contact the number 248-834-3488. They transform patios, pool decks, basements, even driveways. They do it all. And the best part is they move the stuff out for you. They repair your cracks and pits before applying your stunning new floor, guaranteed. Comer and Cross concrete floors never chip, crack, or peel like epoxy or paint. Again, you could call the number 248-834-3488, or you can book your free estimate at comercross.com. Let's get back to the video.
I think that's ultimately a good thing. When you come out and even if you don't have a day where you dominate, even if you have a day where you get beat on a lot of reps, you can learn from that. And this is a team that will learn from those mistakes. And all work with this team seems to be good work. So, 55-45, but it's all good in the end.
Yeah. So a couple more things on defensively. I did see you put the video out about Hutch. How do you think the contract stuff works out? Because I think it's interesting. I felt like personally, like Brad's gotten the contracts done with extensions. He's got those usually done like around the NFL draft. And I think Hutch might be the first one. Obviously, JMO too, and he's made it clear they're waiting on that. But Hutch is the first one that he hasn't said they're going to wait, that they didn't get done by the draft. So I would have to think personally that maybe that's just something on Hutch's team. Maybe they're saying, hey, let's wait. I don't know. But then today he says, I've just been hands off. What is your opinion on that? How do you think that whole thing works out?
Yeah, my whole thought with that situation is that it would have made no sense for him to go out and be the first edge rusher to sign. Like, you look at what's happened this summer, the top of the market has been reset 4 different times, and that's excluding a whole bunch of contracts that have landed somewhere near the top. I think it's like the highest paid edge rusher has jumped like $10 million or I think it was like $7 million maybe. The 5th highest paid edge rusher, 8 months ago, he's getting paid $10 million a year less than the 5th highest paid edge rusher is right now. So this market is just exploding. And, obviously not in those negotiations, can't speak to exactly what's going down. But when you're negotiating with a player that's coming off an injury, it's just business to negotiate against that injury. And I do wonder, how that factors in to the whole situation. And plus the fact that from Hutchinson's perspective, he's thinking, okay, this negotiation is either going to be not taking into account the fact that he was probably going to win Defensive Player of the Year last year. It was at least going to be, look like a top 3 guy in that regard. Or they're going to or they're going to negotiate against this injury. So there's like kind of 2 things working against him, is like he didn't get to put the full like breakout season on display. And like I said, coming off the injury, I think that based on how they've talked about him publicly, like Holmes and Campbell being like, he's the same guy, he looks even better, all this other stuff. Maybe that's not happening as much as it would in a normal case, but I just didn't really think it made a whole lot of sense for him to sign that deal. And then you have Trey Hendrickson, Micah Parsons, 2 guys who still need to sign and could very well end up, if not resetting the edge market altogether, finishing somewhere in that 3rd or 4th, highest paid range. So I think if I had to guess, and this is pure speculation, just, how these things work is, I would guess it's probably on Hutchinson's side, because like you said, Brad Holmes has been very proactive with this, and the fact that it hasn't gotten done, and Holmes said a couple weeks ago there hasn't been any intense talks, that leads me to believe it's probably on Hutchinson's side, and honestly, I do not blame him in the slightest.
Yeah, we've had conversations about the contract and Hutch and all of that, and I've had kind of 2 weird takes with it, to where I think right now, and I've put it out there, like when Hutch went down last year, I think he was the best defensive player in the NFL. I know there's Myles Garrett, but I think it was clear that in that moment he was the best. And in camp, it feels like the reports, and we all see it, like he looks like he's better. So I've put out there, and I've said the last couple months, I think Aidan Hutchinson is the best defensive player in the NFL. And I get like he's gone up against backup tackle, like all of that. I know, again, Myles Garrett, there's these guys out there, but the guy's incredible. But then I'm like, on the other side, when we talk about his contract, I'm also the one that's saying, like, if I'm Brad Holmes, I just don't know if there's a world personally, like, yeah, there's the projection, but it's hard to give, in my opinion, like a $40+ million, I don't know, to reset the market, 43, 44, whatever it's going to be, that deal over Myles Garrett without, to a player that really hasn't won Defensive Player of the Year yet or All Pro. And it's like you want to see that for a full season. So it's like it's weird.
Right. Exactly. And honestly, I like if you're the Lions, like you should have made this deal like yesterday. Like
Agreed.
as soon as like March 12th, I think was the day that they could re-sign him at 4 p.m. They should have said like if it were up to them, I'm pretty sure he would have signed at 4:01.
Yeah.
But yeah, and like I said, like I am imagining that is the conversation that's being had in these negotiations. And it just is the way things work. It's the business side of things. You know, you hear all the time about like in other sports, players in hockey or baseball or whatever, they go to arbitration and they actually have to like stand there in the courtroom and like hear their GM negotiate against them and just saying the meanest things they can possibly think of because they're talking to a literal judge trying to get the salary cap number down. And that can ruin relationships. And that's why agents exist. But yeah, I mean, that has to be playing into the equation here.
I do one last thing. Actually, maybe I have two more things. Quick things. Zadarius Smith. Do you think the Lions get this thing done? Is it something where it's like, hey, he's on his last vacation? When I talked to John about it a couple days ago, he said next Tuesday, if it's going to happen, it's like as soon as that 53-man roster happens, you're probably going to see Zadarius Smith sign on the paper there. Do you think that they do it? Or if not, do you think there's going to get another edge in this room like a Jadeveon Clowney, or they go out and get someone? Because last year they went and got like a position of need, wide receiver. They went and got that. And there still feels like, especially with some of the injuries recently with Ahmed Hassanin, it's like, hey, you probably need to add a little bit more depth. Do you think they do something if it's not Zadarius?
Yeah, I think so. And I do like, I think there's a general, like just talking to my fellow beat members, I think we all think that there's a pretty decent chance that he ends up back because like Brad Holmes keeps making flirty eyes with him whenever he talks about him on like 97.1 The Ticket and stuff like that. Like, oh, you know, we're still in contact with him. And he even said like, I'm not saying that he wants to miss training camp. I'm just saying, you know, if that had to happen, I don't think he'd think it's the worst thing in the world. I'm paraphrasing there, but yeah, I think that is very clearly the situation that is playing out is they kind of put this on the back burner with the idea of revisiting it. I can't remember exactly how old Zadarius Smith is. I think he's like 33. And if you're, you know, that age and, you know, having a great summer with your girlfriend who may or may not be broken up with at this point, maybe you just want to chill for a little bit. Maybe you just want to not go to training camp. Training camp sucks. That is what we hear from players. It's long. It's a grind. And at a certain point, you probably don't need to go through it as much as you did when you were a younger player. So, yeah, I think that's something that they're absolutely going to pursue. And not just with the Hassanin injury, but today we hear Josh Paschal is going to be down for a little bit earlier than previously thought. He was supposed to start practicing at the beginning of September. And that looks like it's going to take a little bit longer as well. So I'm so curious to see how this shakes up because you do have Nate Lynn. You know, you have Isaac Uku, two guys who, if you would have asked me, you know, at the start of training camp, I'd say they're probably going to be on the outside looking in. But with these new injury developments, you might need one or you're probably going to at least need one, maybe two. So that's interesting. And then kind of having a natural fit for Zadarius to where you can bring him in. And that's the interesting thing about him is he came in and he played all over the defensive line last year. Like he wasn't just a pure edge rusher. So him, Marcus Davenport, Aidan Hutchinson, like there's room to fit them all on the field at the same time. And, you know, I think that he ultimately is a guy who you know what you're going to get. He's still playing at a very, very high level. I think people like are kind of like, I don't want to say disrespect, but underappreciate just the production that he has on a year-over-year basis. Like I was talking to somebody and they were like, you know, Brad Holmes didn't do everything he could to get a premier edge rusher into the deadline. I'm like, the guy he got was top 10 in sacks and pressures after he came over. Like, how can you honestly tell me that? Like, it's so hard to acquire these guys in football. It's why there aren't a lot of blockbuster trades in football relative to other leagues, because it's just difficult. There's all this, you know, there's never mind the salary cap implications and just the way they do things so wonky. But yeah, man, I don't know. I just, there are definitely going to be players who do get cut on roster cut down day, who are available, a la Tim Patrick. But at the end of the day, I just don't know where you're going to get more value than you're probably going to get if you bring back Zadarius Smith.
I agree. Even at the deadline, like he was like the best edge rusher that was moved, and even Brad said that he was like we got the best edge rusher essentially.
Yeah, and he said it was like being in the dental chair for like 6 days just to get it done. Like, and so like it's just not easy to do.
Yeah,
and I think people underappreciate that sometimes.
Are you on the side? I know a lot of people like are there's people arguing the Trey Hendrickson stuff, and I saw the Brian Branch, all of that. Where are you at with that? Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure because I went on a rant yesterday about it, and it was just like, what are we doing here at this point? It's ridiculous conversations, in my opinion.
Like, not only does it like, I don't know, if you want to just like talk about whether it like actually makes sense in terms of like value gain, like value added versus value loss, like I don't know. Maybe there's an argument in there. Pass rusher is a super important trade, but like you just like the whole Trey Hendrickson the Lions cannot afford Trey Hendrickson. It just is what it is. They might have room on the cap sheet this year, but they're saving as much of it as they can because when you look to the 2026 balance sheet, they're already $50 million in the hole. $50 million in the hole that they have to dig out of. And like, I don't think it's going to be all that difficult to do. They're going to, restructure probably a bunch of deals and everything's going to work out in the end. But like when you're starting from that play, like when you're living paycheck to paycheck and all of a sudden, like you're already behind, you missed a payment or something. And then all of a sudden, like, that your next paycheck, which is like usually just barely enough to get by, you automatically got to take out like $200 to $300 because you missed a payment last year. And so it's like, well, this is just starting a bad cycle of like that you feel like you're never going to be able to catch up to. And that's what I think the idea like of trading for a Trey Hendrickson is going to do, because it'd be one thing if he was a rental. Like if he was a rental, all for it, go for it. The entire dispute with Cincinnati is that they won't make him one of the highest paid edge rushers in the league. You can't afford him. You can't afford him. End of story.
That's what I've been preaching that for the last couple of months. I've been in so many arguments with people, and I'm like, all right, if you really want it, I would love for you, like, do a PowerPoint for me and break down the money. And they're like, well, that's not much. No, you can't say it and give out these takes and do that if it's like, hey, it's impossible. You can't pay 2 edge rushers $40 million and expect to keep a team
and
together.
A quarterback $50 million and an offensive tackle $30 million and a wide receiver $30 million and everybody else is coming down the pipe. Gibbs, JMO. If they got to make a tough decision there, like tough decisions. That's one thing that's interesting is they haven't had to make a truly tough decision yet when it comes to like a big money player, homegrown talent. Like I'm trying to think of some of the guys that maybe they've had to let walk. Kevin Zeitler, a $9 million player, good player for sure.
It hasn't been one of those top tier guys yet, like top tier.
That is such a different level of money and investment and all of those sorts of things. So yeah, I don't know.
I gave someone the situation the other day. I put out a guy like Brian Branch, Gibbs, JMO, Laporta. I think it was those 4. And I said, you can only keep 2 or 3 of those 4. Who are you choosing? And I was like, that's essentially, and like, even if you do a deal like the Trey Hendrickson, you're essentially making, it's not even 3 of those 4. It's like 2 or 1 of those 4. It's like, now you have to make that decision. And it's like, that's where Brad's kind of dealing with right now. And that's not even with like, there are other guys in that building, like DJ Reader, who's due. Like he's done. It's like you just walk away from him. Like it's a tough job that Brad has, and I think a lot of people like those unrealistic takes. They put me over the edge sometimes. They really do.
Yeah.
Do you have time for one more question? I just want to ask about the preseason game. Just a couple players or guys that are on the bubble that you're gonna, at least for the people that are watching, to keep an eye on. Offensive, defensively, just bubble guys that have a chance to make the roster or are probably just out.
Well, we'll start with offense. Hendon Hooker obviously is the big one. I think a lot of people are ready for the Lions to cut bait on him, and I get the frustration absolutely. And I think we actually talked about him the last time I was on here. But the thing with the whole thing with that to me is like, if you cut him, if you waive him, which is what you have to do, there's, I would say, a 95% chance that he's going to get picked up by another team. And you might be okay with that. People might be okay with that. I don't think the Lions are okay with that. I don't think at the end of the day they're ready to cut bait entirely, because he's shown like believe it or not, it hasn't necessarily shown in the preseason games, but from this time last year, Hendon Hooker looks like a marginally improved player, and that might just be a knock against where he started at. I don't know. But it just hasn't shown up in the preseason games. And I don't think he really has any excuses for that. Like there's no way to kind of explain that away. He needs to be better. But at the end of the day, like I just think the Lions are going to be unwilling to pull the plug on the experiment entirely because they're going to want 3 quarterbacks going into the season anyways. And it doesn't really make sense to just go out and get somebody completely new. So I'm pretty sure they're going to keep Hendon, but Dan Campbell said he's going to play most of the game on Saturday. So I'm looking forward to that, seeing if he can kind of start putting things together just even a little bit. Wide receiver, obviously a big one. Jackson Meeks, Dominic Lovett. Those are 2 guys who are kind of on the bubble for me, who have had relatively decent preseasons. I mean, Jackson Meeks been the star of the show the last 2 weeks. I think he has 90-something yards last week, 7 catches. Week before that, he has 70-something and a touchdown. So that's going to be interesting because they might not keep more than 5 receivers. I think they will. I think they'll probably keep 6. That's what I keep kind of projecting him as. But, assuming that there's only room for one guy, it's kind of it's going to come down to who flashes more in this game because they've shown a lot of similar things to this point, different types of players, but maybe a similar type of value added if you keep them on this roster. Just going through the positions here, D-line, there's a couple of guys who are kind of floating on the bubble there and the edge. Nate Land and Isaac Ukwu on the edge. I think they have massive opportunities ahead of them with the injuries to Pascal and Hassanin. So that's going to be interesting to watch. Defensive tackle, they got a UDFA from Houston, Keith Cooper, and a UDFA who's been with the team for a couple of years, Chris Smith, and as well as returning veteran Pat O'Connor, who are all going to be kind of fighting for maybe 1 or 2 spots, and there could be some roster gymnastics there, perhaps with, Pat O'Connor being a veteran. Like I'm trying to figure out who's going to be like the surprise veteran cut that ends up doing the Kyle Pecco thing, where it's like, oh, this guy didn't even play in preseason games, and then he got cut, and then they just sign him right back because he's a veteran. You can maneuver things that way. So, looking out for that there. And then in the defensive backfield, like there's DJ Reed, Taron Arnold, Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch, Amik Robertson, and then I think behind them you got Avonte Maddox, Rocky Steen. And I think it's pretty wide open from there. I think Eric Hallett probably has an inside track in making this roster. Khalil Dorsey is another cornerback who's going to make the roster. But Nick Whiteside, he's a local guy. He went to Auburn Hills Avondale, played at Saginaw Valley State. He's been impressing in camp, but might still find himself on the outside looking in just because of where he started. So those are all the guys that I'm kind of watching going into this week, who I think have a chance to make the roster, but are firmly on the bubble, and I'm probably leaning out on most of them.
I'm hoping, I went to Saginaw Valley at the same time as Nick, and I was on with the basketball squad, so I'm pushing for that one. I'm like, hey, I hope he has a good game of interception on Saturday or something to put him over the edge.
Yeah, he's had a great camp, and he had a couple pretty good preseason games as well. I've used this analogy a couple times now, but like it just reminded me of going into last game. He's like an FCS school that's like tied on the road at a Big Ten team, but it's like he's done everything right so far, but he needs to like keep doing everything absolutely perfectly, or otherwise things can spiral in a hurry. And I think for the most part, he's done that. He didn't have the best game against Miami last week, but also wasn't too bad either. So interested to see how he finishes, because I think, a lot of times they're evaluating the entire body of work, 17 practices, 4 games at this point when it's all said and done. But I mean, if you're kind of on the bubble the entire way and then you make a statement in that last game, I think that can actually matter a whole lot.